Welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, and this is Season 31, Episode 14, Defining Your Sexual Freedom, also known as the 10 Commandments of Sexuality. And I would like to first thank the live audience for being very patient with me this morning because for some reason I couldn't get the camera to work. And honestly, it's still not working because it's not at the frame rate and the resolution I would prefer, but I figured, let's just get it going. And I also took the time to set up some show notes for this particular episode. I very rarely ever use show notes or actually write down my points. I'm usually just speaking off the cuff. And I maintain that, the level of importance for this particular lecture is definitely going to be something that, it needs to be said in such a way, or at least in an organized manner, so that people can understand it. Now, for my critics who maintain I'm a misogynistic, sexist ass, while conveniently ignoring their misandrous point of view, I would say that probably out of every lecture that I release, this particular one would be the one where I would be labeled sexist the most. And although that is not my intention, and I don't think, I don't walk around thinking that men are better than women and whatnot and that kind of a thing. At least what is sexism? I don't do that. But for some reason, people think I do, and I don't. So it's kind of an interesting standpoint. But for the sake of this show, let's actually define sexism according to dictionary.com. Noun: attitudes or behavior based on traditional stereotypes of gender roles. Wait a minute. So, according to dictionary.com, I'm automatically a sexist if I'm using stereotypes that are based on traditional gender roles or traditional stereotypes of gender roles. Interesting. 2, discrimination or devaluation based on a person's sex or gender, as in restricted job opportunities such as discrimination against women. I'm not here to discriminate against women or anybody for that matter, although I often feel discriminated against by women on a daily basis, sometimes even by my own wife, actually. And she has admitted to me that, based on her sexist father, she mirrored some of his behaviors and exercised some sexist behaviors herself within the context of our marriage, which is fine. We've gotten over it. It happens, But discrimination, no. I'm not here to discriminate against anybody for any reason. I am here to say, at least to women, like, you can do whatever you want. Just realize there's going to be consequences to your actions, and you'll be held accountable. And one of the ways that women are held accountable is when they are rejected by high-value men. And why they're rejected by high-value men, etc. That's not sexist. That's just biology. That's reality. So, okay. Another definition is ingrained and institutionalized prejudice against women. I'm not prejudging women. I am judging women as they should be judged, but I'm not prejudging them and not being presumptuous or assumptuous about it. I am very well researched in this area. And number 4 is hatred, dislike, or mistrust of women, misogyny, etc. That kind of sounds more like a MGTOW approach, which is men going their own way. I do not subscribe to MGTOW at all. I do not subscribe to men's rights activism. And while most people maintain I am red-pilled or support the red pill, I, in a lot of ways, actually do support the red pill, and in a lot of ways I don't support the red pill. And that's when red pill people would basically say that I'm a purple pill person. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with practicality. And I'm trying to take a practical approach to sexuality, especially Jungian sexuality, from a psychological point of view and a behavioral psychological point of view, so that we can actually arrive to proper conclusions about how human beings should actually be behaving in this postmodern era. Because we are definitely postmodern Modern died basically December 21st, 2020, in my opinion, which is the first day of the new age of the Aquarius. And while I am not a New Ager or subscribe to New Age thinking, I know that the elite in the world who follow books like the Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley, thank you to the person who suggested that I read it, and then also their other belief systems according to the Georgia Guidestones, look that up, which is very rife with eugenics and other horrible teachings that are basically Malthusian. Those are some of the things that I'm against, and it's because of those belief systems that we have endemic fatherlessness throughout the world. And fatherlessness is the number one problem affecting our race. It's why masculinity doesn't exist. It's why we have toxic feminism rampant and throughout the world. And it's ultimately why women are becoming dog moms or cat moms and dying alone at the greatest numbers ever seen in history. But then again, you can't have a feminine primary social order without affluence. Because without affluence, women are far more dependent on men because, they are the, quote, weaker sex. And no, I do not believe in egalitarianism. I do not believe in equalism. The genders are not equal. I do not believe in John Locke's writing. I do not, sure, all men are created equal, but that doesn't mean men and women are created equal. And a lot of people have a problem with me and tell me I'm a sexist for saying that. No, it's obvious biology, actually. So, is science a religion or is science reality to you? That's what I would like to know. I mean, where does that come from? So, anyway, the other issue that I would like to state within the introduction of this particular extremely controversial lecture is that I made a mistake last night in my lecture last night. So before I begin, or as actually part of the delivery of today's lecture and this episode, I would like to be able to correct a mistake by making an adjustment to what I said yesterday. And the adjustment is that I left out one important thing that was not talked about when defining sexual immorality. And I really need to make sure that that's talked about. One second. I need to text Railgun. So if I don't answer when you call, that is why. Okay. Yeah, I just had to let her know that, I'm actually, doing a show right now because she, being an ESTP, does not like it when I don't answer the phone because ESTPs always expect, that when they call you that you answer and you drop everything for them because that's how ESTPs are. And then they expect you to text them because they don't want you taking away their choice. So it's so funny, these little hypocrisies that the types have, which I outline in the Hypocrisies of the ESTP, which is a fantastic lecture just released last month for the premium lectures for the members, csjoseph.life/members. Check it out. So anyway, but I did make a little bit of a mistake last night, and I would like to have the opportunity to remedy that mistake because I left something important out. So that is very important. So, okay. So, anyway, the adjustment is that I was making an argument about sexual immorality, aka porneia, in the Bible, which is what the majority of the sexual social zeitgeist within the United States of America and ultimately Western society or anywhere that Christianity has touched on the face of the earth. And based on that, I provided a correct definition of it, removing certain things, etc. But I left one piece out. So before we officially begin this, I would like to again clarify my definition of what sexual immorality, aka porneia, actually is. So based on that, here is what is actually considered sexually sinful in the eyes of the Bible. And I know a lot of you don't like it how I talk about the Bible so much. But the reason why I talk about the Bible is that when it comes to things like Mormonism, even Islam originally claimed that the Gospels in the New Testament were part of their canon for the Quran. So based on that, I like going really far back in terms of the chain of custody, because if you think about it, the Torah and the Bible are part of the Muslim chain of custody, as it is for Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, Protestantism, Catholicism. It just really doesn't matter. They still have all these Judeo-Christian roots. And there's even going back into the Torah, there's also some sharing in terms of pagan belief systems as well. So basically, like, I can utilize biblical teaching and it would still readily apply to most people in the world. Like look at Norse mythology talking about the giants, but then you have in the Torah talking about the Nephilim, which are the giants, etc. So based on this, I maintain that Judeo-Christian spiritual or religious traditions basically allow me to paint a very big brush on the whole world with all these various belief systems, because a lot of it is pretty much the same. Some of it is different. But like, for example, like I maintain that pagan gods in Norse mythology and Greek mythology are actually angels and not actually God. Just like how Jupiter would claim to be the king of the gods when he actually still orbits the sun. He's not a king of the gods. He's a fraud, for example, which would make Odin a fraud. He is not the Allfather. So yeah, a fraud. And then when you also compare that to the original first religion on the planet, first recorded religion, then that was the Mystery Babylon religion, etc. And if you don't know what that is, I highly recommend looking at Bill Cooper and his podcast from the 90s called The Hour of the Time. They should be available on YouTube somewhere or anywhere. And then listen to his Mystery Babylon series if you want to get more educated on the first religion and how it integrates into the rest of the religions and the spiritual belief systems of the entire world. It's a very interesting point of view. But the point is, I utilize biblical teaching because it allows me to paint a broad brush when it comes to arguing ethics and morality throughout the world, and a lot of people struggle with that. But that's why I do it. And also it's convenient for me because I'm a pastor's kid. So I still maintain that I vehemently do not appreciate the church whatsoever. I am an anti-church person. In terms of like being anti-the church or anti-bride of Christ, I'm not anti-bride of Christ, to those of you who are Christian watching this. No, I am anti the social construct that is church today, and it is a pagan monstrosity. Don't believe me? Read Frank Viola's book, Pagan Christianity, where he criticizes how crappy it actually is. So anyway, clarifying and defining sexual immorality, aka porneia. So here's what it is considered actually sexually sinful in no particular order. No sex during menstruation. And I think that's because it's due to health reasons. I don't know exactly for sure why that is the case, but I think it's for health reasons. The second thing is no incest. I think that's pretty obvious. No pedophilia. I think that's even more obvious. Okay. No ritual prostitution. Okay, so you can't mix sexuality or prostitution with spirituality. Okay, fair enough. This next one is for men, and this is no sex or lust, basically, with a woman that belongs to another man, which, matches the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments, which is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Okay, fair enough. I can deal with that. This next one is for women. No sex with a man who is not your husband without your husband's permission. Okay, that is sexually immoral. If you have his permission, then it's fine. And for men, this is another one for men. And this is what I left out from last night within my definition. I forgot to mention this, so I apologize for not mentioning this. But this is for men. No sex with a virgin unless you intend to keep her. So disparaging a virgin is actually a very big deal. Now, obviously, reduces her sexual market value, which is something in Judaism, in the Torah, that was severely forbidden, and you can see this in Exodus chapters 20 through 22, and also Deuteronomy chapter 22 as well. That is an issue, but let's explore the moral and ethical reasons for that. Like, if you disparage a virgin, I mean, even Benjamin Franklin, who is an ENTP, admitted that it may be her ruin, basically. And oftentimes, when you ask a woman, hey, like, what was it like to lose your virginity? Who was it to? Do you regret losing your virginity to that person or whatnot? And almost every single time, especially in my coaching practice, when I ask that question, women say, yes, I do regret it. They do regret it. And that's the kind of regret that can lead to other bad decisions in their life. I knew a woman in high school, and she was an ENFJ, and she ended up having a crush on me in my senior year. And she asked me out to Tolo. And I refused her because I was just a good Christian little boy, and she made it clear to me that she wanted to have sex with me after the dance. And she wasn't a virgin or nothing and whatnot, but like I severely judged her in those days for those things, and those judgments and those hurtful things, especially given that she was an ENFJ. She took it so seriously that it led to a series of events in her life and bad decision parts on her part, because it just really engaged her FI nemesis, that she ended up basically having an insane amount of sexual relationships, ended up getting pregnant. She became an alpha widow. The guy walked out on her. She dealt with some homelessness, some severe financial issues. She was just suffering for a long time. And I often think to myself about how my judgments of her, my unfair judgments of her, really, made it worse for her, because I wasn't willing to share my masculine idealism with her because I was so poisoned by my Christian idealism and ideology. And basically I was telling her that, she was a whore and she was worthless and all this bullshit because of my Christian upbringing, which I honestly regret doing. And it was one of the greatest regrets of my life. I remember having the opportunity to talk to her twin sister and apologize for my behavior. And then that led to me actually talking to her directly, where I was able to tell her straight up, I'm very sorry for what I did and what I said to you. I was wrong and I regret that. But that's an example of just how bad it can get. But she cited within the conversation that like it just goes all the way back to like the day that she decided to lose her virginity, and she did it with a low value man basically, and she heavily regretted that decision. So she was in effect telling me it wasn't exactly all my fault. It was her responsibility at the end of the day, and she was taking responsibility for some of her poor sexual decisions that she made, and that was potentially due, I don't know this for sure, due to abuse in her life. I don't know. But I do know like even stories of the past with my wife, for example, and some of the sexual decisions that she made when she first became sexually active. Oftentimes, she carries a lot of regret related to that. But how she was conditioned and socialized and taught by her father, it, you can almost understand, it's like an NP version of, if I'm going to do the time, I may as well do the crime, basically. Because throughout her upbringing, both her parents told her on a regular basis that she was a total hoe, that she was a whore, that she had no value because of that, but she was actually still a virgin the whole time. It's just no one believed her. And so then you end up having that perspective that NPs often have. If I'm going to do the time, I may as well do the crime, basically, which is a very sad point of view if you think about it. But this is some of the things that women have to deal with on a regular basis. So I urge parents, stop jumping to conclusions about your children. They're a lot more righteous than you think. And it's really just you projecting your own regrets and your own bullshit on your own children. And maybe you should consider not doing that. It's so annoying. So, uh, so yeah, don't have sex with a virgin. Men, do not have sex with a virgin unless you plan on keeping her. And realize that if you do have sex with her, because, just like the song goes in Aladdin, which is a sexual song, it's a whole new world, it's a whole new world because Aladdin and Jasmine just screwed, okay? Like, if you don't know that, like, what are you doing, okay? Aladdin is extremely sexually charged film, and there's a lot more reasons for that. But that entire point is that when you have sex with a virgin, it's a whole new world. And when it's a whole new world, they have that, men have it worse because that sexual hunger is there, but that's just kind of how it is for women, and that there's like a biological shift, psychologically even, as a result of that biological shift. And it's important to protect that. And given that a woman's body count is probably the number one thing that conveys sexual market value to men in her life, you are severely damaging her and disparaging her if you decide to, basically dump her afterwards. So the point is, do not have sex with a virgin unless you plan on keeping her indefinitely. Okay? That is a big deal. All right? And that's why. So anyway, so what is sexual freedom? Sexual freedom is, this thing that, the church is completely against. Also, people who practice Malthusian belief systems are also against because they're afraid of overpopulation destroying the ecology of the earth. That is essentially what they maintain. And monogamy and socialized monogamy, and expected monogamy has been put in place by people with these belief systems in an effect to reduce the population growth of this planet, basically. Because the idea is if a man has multiple wives, he's going to have, 20, 30, 40 children. That is going to be a specific problem. But if we institute monogamy and ultimately the nuclear family and social engineer everybody into believing that that is the norm, and don't believe me that that's a thing, you should be reading Gustave Le Bon and his book The Crowd, written in 1895, or it was published in 1895. And then the next book in the chain of custody, which is Propaganda by Edward Bernays, 1928. And then the next book a book in that chain of custody is The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray, published in 2017. Please understand these macro social engineering techniques as to how this worked. And Malthusians, who ultimately controlled the Catholic Church, who still maintain their beliefs from the Mystery Babylon religion, because the Catholic Church is a pagan religion. It is pagan, just like the Mystery Babylon religion that it came from is also pagan. Okay, paganism and Malthusianism basically run together. They're basically the same belief system. They have the same tenets, etc. Why else do you think that temple priestesses, when they would get pregnant after having sex with everyone on Sunday, would sacrifice their children, to pagan gods? There's a reason for that, okay? And that's where it comes from, okay? So based on that, you could see how fatherlessness just leads to the death of children. And it's also talked about heavily in the Apocalypse of Peter, a book that was originally in biblical canon, but the Nicene Creed removed it from biblical canon. And this book outlines lots of punishment for people who engage in the abortion act. And I imagine abortion would not be legal if that book was included in biblical canon. But the pagans who ran the Council of Nicaea and ultimately the Council of Trent decided to leave it out, likely because in order to satisfy or bring their pagan belief system and meld it with the way, which is old Christianity, to create Christianity, the pagan religion known as Christianity, they had to come to that conclusion, which is kind of lame. So those things are what sexual immorality is. That's what porneia, according to the Bible, actually is. So those things are on the line. And but let's talk about what's not included in the definition of sexual immorality or porneia, and that is premarital sex, also known as fornication, and extramarital sex, also known as fornication. Now, if you're to open up your New International Version Bible, your NIV Bible, you would see the word fornication there instead of sexual immorality or porneia. And that is actually a biblical interpolation and a mistranslation at the same time. Yet so many people believe that the NIV, for example, is the infallible holy word of God. No, it is not. It is a construct of man. The Bible is a construct of man. Okay, it is an issue. Most people also like to tell me that the Quran is also a construct of God and that it exists in heaven, etc. And to which I scoff at that, and I'm just like, so you're telling me that when Muhammad was writing the Quran and he wrote something that was potentially relating to pedophilia within the Quran, saying that some sexual act was okay when it obviously was sexual immorality, and then he said Satan made me do it? Really? Really? Yeah, you want to make that claim that your book is not a construct of man but is of God? Okay, that's a contradiction, folks. So those of you in the Muslim community, I suggest that you apply critical thinking to your own belief system just as much as I have had to apply critical thinking to my belief system and ultimately every other belief system that I come into contact with. If anyone wants to accuse me of what, or ask me like, Chase, okay, so what is your religion? Well, my religion is critical thinking, actually. Okay, so maybe you should consider that, and before you start judging everyone else infidels. Okay, that would be nice. That would be nice. And I don't mean that in an Islamophobic way. And I'm not saying that Muslims in general judge everyone as infidels. I'm just saying be careful to judge. So fornication is not an aspect of porneia. It is not an aspect of sexual immorality. Also, sex with a prostitute is not considered sexual immorality under the definition of porneia either. And pornography is also not something that is outlawed under porneia either. Now, while fornication and sex with a prostitute and pornography are not sinful, obviously they're unwise. Obviously, okay? So King Solomon, who is an ENTP, also known as the wisest man who has walked the earth, also the richest man who has ever lived. I mean, just his gold holdings alone was worth $2 trillion in today's money. Just his gold holdings alone. And the richest man in the world does not have $1 trillion. Okay? So Solomon in the book of Proverbs, especially the first 4 or 5 chapters, it's like the first thing he talks about is about how having sex with a whore or engaging in prostitution would be like the end of a man, and how her legs lead to death and the pit, and it's extremely unwise to have sexual relationships with prostitutes. So he says, don't do it. And obviously there's a risk of contracting diseases when you're going to lie with a prostitute. Obviously. Now relating to pornography can be a sin if the specific porn that a man is watching is violating the aforementioned rules of porneia, which is no sex during menstruation, no incest, no pedophilia, no ritual prostitution, no sex with a woman that belongs to another man, without permission, of course. No sex with a man who is not your husband without your husband's permission. For men, no sex with a virgin unless you intend to keep her. So those things, if they're in the pornography, obviously that would make that porn wrong. There's a reason why people go to jail for child pornography. It's obvious, folks. Okay, these are basic. Okay. I just need to do another point there just to update my notes here as I'm going through my notes carefully. Another thing about pornography can become a sin if it becomes an addiction, and there's so many men out there who is addicted to pornography, but any addiction is actually a sin because addiction is known as idolatry. So idolatry is very sinful. In fact, idolatry is the number one sin that anyone can commit. It was the first sin committed by Adam, for example, because he put Eve on a pedestal and he committed idolatry by putting her above him and even putting her above God. He was putting the creation above God. That is a form of sin. It is the first sin. That's why the first commandment in the 10 Commandments is written, "Thou shalt not have any gods before me." That's basically saying do not commit idolatry, okay? So if you have a porn addiction or you're addicted to pornography, you are committing idolatry, therefore it is a sin, okay? So pornography is a gateway into sin, so don't do it. Porn is also unwise due to the extreme damage to men's hormones and also neurological transmitters, because you're basically, if you're masturbating while looking at pornography, you're engaging in a sexual act that doesn't have all of the neurotransmitters. It's only dopamine. There's no oxytocin. There is no, the other neurotransmitters that are there when you're having your orgasm experience. It's dopamine only, and this can lead to a dopamine addiction. This is why INTP men and INFP men, but especially INTP men, struggle the most with pornography addictions than anyone. This is why I maintain that SI child, out of all of the 16 types, is the most likely to commit the sin of idolatry, if you think about it, okay, from a psychological standpoint. So this is why I highly recommend to SI child men above everyone else to practice fasting. Fasting from food, fasting from pornography, fasting from video games, fasting from any dopamine activity, to prove through concrete action that they are not committing idolatry. That's important, okay? It's also an aspect of self-respect. So let's talk about fornication. Fornication, aka premarital sex or extramarital sex. It can be unwise if it's culturally unacceptable. I mean, it's culturally unacceptable in the United States of America. Did you know in certain states you can actually if you have extramarital sex, for example, you can be put into prison. Did you know that some states have that on the books? Okay, so it can be unwise. It's definitely permissible, but not exactly beneficial, as the Apostle Paul would say. And here's another one. Okay, let's see here. Okay. I forgot another point. Another aspect of something that is not generally considered sexual immorality or porneia, but should be added. I maintain it should be added to the definition, but it's not. It's a sin of its own right. Marriage vows. Marriage vows are a sin. They are a sin under Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 37. That passage explains just how marriage vows are actually sinful. And marriage vows are literally another form of idolatry, okay? That's a form of idolatry. It is a sin. And if people are trying to argue with me all the time, but it's pretty obvious, Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, with Jesus saying what he's doing, because it's a sin. It's idolatry. It's no different than Adam telling Eve, "It's okay that you screwed somebody else behind my back. I still love you anyway, and I'm in it for good, and I'm going to put you above me because you're more important than me because I'm a beta cuck." And I'm like, okay, wow, really? Thank you for committing idolatry there, Adam. So that's a problem. So marriage vows are also a sin. So anyway, we spent a lot of time discussing what is not sexually allowed and what is technically sexual sin, based on this. So let's actually talk about what is allowed. We see all these things, thank you, C.S. Joseph, for telling me what I can't do. So what can I do? I thought this lecture was about sexual freedom. Exactly. So what does that mean? How do we come to these conclusions, right? So let's talk about what is allowed under the sexual standard. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 37 talks about let your yes be yes and your no be no. I talked about it in last night's lecture, etc. And it basically is just be a man or woman of your word. Okay? If you agree to exclusivity with a woman, then be exclusive with her until such time you tell her that you don't agree to be exclusive with her anymore, etc. There it is. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, but don't go into marriage vows. That's really a bad thing. So, for example, if a man does not agree to exclusivity with a woman, and this even includes his wife, he can have unlimited sexual partners in his lifetime, in and outside of marriage. That is absolutely allowed. That is very allowed. Now, if he made a vow or a promise, or he said that, yeah, I'll be exclusive and just committed to just you as a woman, then he needs to tell his woman that that is no longer what's going to happen and live his life differently. Because if he doesn't do that, then he is a liar, which would be a sin, technically. He would be wrong, and he's a liar at that point. If a man never agrees to exclusivity with a woman, then he can have unlimited sexual partners. And it's so funny, because I see some men in the men's group, the CSJ men's group, who have a roster of women that they're banging. There's a guy in the men's group who's got 6 different girls that he has sexual relationships with at the university he's at. And every now and then, one of them will try to challenge him and deny him sexual access to her because she's demanding commitment from him. And he refuses and says, well, I never agreed to that to begin with, and basically just he dumps her and moves on to the next person. That's on her for having low standards and for not ensuring commitment right from the get-go. That's on her, not on him. So this is an aspect of male sexual freedom a lot of people aren't aware of. If you don't agree to exclusivity, then you're not violating. You let your yes be yes and your no be no, okay, which is the gold standard of sexuality. Provided a man is not committing idolatry and harming his health, he can look at porn once in a while, basically. And also, provided that pornography is not violating porneia or sexual immorality either, obviously child porn, right? Obviously. Provided there is no spiritual or ritual component of the sexual act, a man can lie with a prostitute, although this is not recommended and very unwise, as I've just already established. If a man made past commitments in his marriage due to marriage vows, because he didn't listen to C.S. Joseph in 2021, outlining exactly what the truth is instead of what the bullshit that the church is serving up every Sunday with their emasculating slop that's delivered from the pulpit. If a man made past commitments in his marriage due to marriage vows, he can still inform his wife that he will be changing his model of sexual rules under let your yes be yes and your no be no. Sometimes, men, when it comes to agreeing to marriage and marriage vows and doing that whole thing, they're not even aware of what they're getting into. For example, marriage is the contract that no one gets legal advice on. So given that the men effectively were ignorant or completely unaware of, the consequences of making those vows and the consequences of making those promises, and, it's kind of like signing a contract under duress, that contract is effectively null and void, basically. This allows men to basically tell their wives, yeah, well, I didn't know about hypergamy, I didn't know about your solipsism, I didn't know about male idealism, I didn't know about rite of passage, I didn't know about any of these things because my dad never taught me, and I've been conditioned by and socialized by society and the church to just, believe in the soulmate myth and have one partner and have one commitment, and no one ever told me that I could live my life this way, which is how I would prefer to live it. Therefore, under let your yes be yes and your no be no, I am telling you that my no is now no, right? Or I'm saying yes to this other lifestyle. Okay. Now, if you were to go have an extramarital affair or with somebody, or an extramarital sexual relationship with a woman who does not belong to another man without permission, etc., then you would still be a liar, to your wife in that marriage situation. So you would be wrong. So you have to tell her ahead of time. You have to tell her. That's very, very important that you tell her that. If you don't tell her, you're a liar, and thus in sin. Okay. So granted, when women, especially your wives, when you tell them that you're going to live your life this way, they'll want a divorce. And this is most likely to happen, especially if the woman is in her late 30s or in her 20s. because she knows that she has some sexual market value left. Although a woman does not have very much sexual market value in the late 30s. Actually, she basically has none. But due to development phase, they kind of inflate their ego in their late 30s sometimes. And that's where you get books like Eat, Pray, Love, etc. from Elizabeth Gilbert. And it's a problem. It's a serious issue, and they end up seeking divorce on their own, because 80% of marriages that end in divorce that divorce is initiated by women, right? So some of your wives, when you say that you're going to live your life by this new standard, they're going to want a divorce. And it's funny to me because we already know that as predicted by Rollo Tomassi, that society already is in a state of open hypergamy, but it's going in a state of open cuckoldry. And open cuckoldry is known as polyamory, okay? And that's the beta male version. The alpha male version is polygamy. And the difference between polyamory and polygamy is that polyamory is a man can screw any woman he wants, but women can screw any man she wants, and potentially get pregnant, and who's the father, and who's the responsibility of taking up that person. And that's very possible in the affluent society that we live in now, because we have moved from a nuclear family model to a child support model of child rearing within our culture. So that's very possible. The alpha version, polygamy, basically is a man can have sex with as many women as he wants, but none of those women can have sex with any other man except him. And the alphas and the super high value men live their life that way, or will be living their life that way within the next 2 years. Within the next 2 years, you're going to see this as a normal sexual shift, as a result. It's very normal for that, and that's coming. So yes, granted, your wife may want a divorce when you tell her that. Now, but here's the thing. And this is something that men need to be educated on. So if you are a man married to a woman who is in her 40s or late 30s or in her 30s even, and all of a sudden for the first time in your life you're attracting 18 to 26-year-olds because you're in your prime, and a woman's prime is basically from 18 to 25, that's her prime, but a man's prime is basically 36 to 42. So if you're in that age range, and usually, men get married to women when they're 29, they're about the same age as each other. So statistically, if you're like 40 years old and you're attracting, a 22, 23-year-old, but you're married to a 39-year-old woman, post-childbearing age, doesn't have very much sexual market value whatsoever, etc. And you've come to realize these truths and come to realize what's going on as a result. You have a lot of leverage within your marriage. So basically, what I'm saying is that given that your wife at that time does not have much sexual market value, it's actually less likely that she would divorce you and just be like, okay, yeah, fine, let your yes be yes, your no be no. And then at the same time, you could also tell her that you expect her to only be with you and not any other man at the same time. And you can actually, in effect, force a polygamist type of relationship within your life with your existing marriage, because women have way less leverage the older they are, right? Now, granted, because of feminism and the feminine primary social order, and because women's innate solipsism and their hypergamy is heavily enabled by society, there's still a good chance she still may seek divorce, but any man that she can attract after you would be at least 20 years older. I know a 50-year-old screwing a 30-year-old. I know a 60-year-old screwing a 37-year-old, for example. So the older a woman is, the older a man she can attract. Therefore, she has less bargaining power when it comes to being in a marriage. So if you as a man, because you've been lied to your whole life and conditioned and socialized into thinking one man, one woman, soulmate myth crap, committing to one woman, not having any sexual freedom under improper biblical teaching or bullshit from the church, you have a lot more leverage than you realize, and you can utilize that leverage with your wife, because it's like, hey, I'm attracting 20-year-olds for the first time in my entire life. I'm going to seek that out, and you're just going to have to be okay with it. And because women at that age kind of more value security instead of, alpha fitness, for example, they're more than likely to actually be okay with it. Furthermore, Women biologically are actually programmed. They're pre-programmed to allow men to have multiple sexual relationships with other women otherwise. The only reason why they don't now, by and large, is because they are socialized by society in the feminine primary social order and conditioned to think otherwise. But biologically, there's this thing called, and you can look this up, it's called mate copying or mate copying strategy. It's also known as the Bachelor effect, as taught by Andrew Ryan. And basically what that means is if a woman sees you with other women, you're already qualified to be attractive and a man of value because you are with other women. And that's called mate choice copying, right? And there's a book that actually explains how that dynamic works of a man taking on multiple women, basically, and he has exclusive sexual relationships with them or any other woman of his choosing, but they can't have sex with any other man, only him, basically. And that book is called The Red Tent, and that is one of the books that we asked the women's group to actually read, is The Red Tent. It's historical fiction, it's a fantastic read, but it really outlines the social dynamics of what's actually happening, in a polygamous-like relationship, which alpha males and high-value men will be enforcing within the next 2 years, if not they are doing already, right? And as a man who has been a beta his whole life and in that model and basically a polyamorous his whole life, if he's able to upgrade himself to the level of alpha or sigma as a result of rite of passage and making him and continuous improvement and all of those things that build up his masculinity so where he can turn himself into a high-value man, then he can actually have that polygamous lifestyle. What I'm saying, though, is to married men is like if you're in a situation where like you've had the truth pulled over your eyes and you've lived this existence where you're being socially forced against your will and conditioned into thinking one man, one woman, only commit to one woman, you don't have to. You really don't have to. And because you are sold a false bill of goods, you have every right to tell your wife that, no, I'm going to live my life this way because you didn't know any different. It's like signing a contract under duress. You should not be held responsible for something you agreed to without knowing the full consequences of what you agreed to. That's why I'm here to educate you appropriately. So understand how important that is. So just going through my notes. So if you're a man married to a woman who's in her 40s and you're attracting 18 and 26-year-old girls for the first time in your life because you're in your prime, inform your wife of these changes and go for it. She may divorce you, but 80% of marriages are initiated by women anyway. Besides, with how bad things are getting in the world right now, food shortages, labor shortages, hyperinflation, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, pestilence, famine, war is around the corner, folks. War is around the corner. The older your wife is, the less likely she will divorce you. This is really important for INP men to understand because they're really, really uncomfortable and protect their comfort zone. It's really hard to get them to be comfortable with asserting themselves in this way. In fact, due to a concept known as mate choice copying, which I just talked about, aka the Bachelor effect, women are biologically programmed to allow men to have other women. Whether or not they are willing to admit that or not, it doesn't matter if they admit it because you judge a woman by her actions and not her words, because women have this thing where they will move the goalpost and change their mind consistently, so you can only judge a woman by her actions and never her words. Society conditions women via feminism and enabling their innate female solipsism that one man, one woman is the social norm, but it is not the biological norm. Okay? An interesting book that outlines how this works, that's The Red Tent, which is what I said, just going through my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. So my point is, if your life's SMV or sexual market value is low and it is declining every day because she's getting older, because a new woman is turning 18 every day, a new woman is turning 21 every single day, it is very likely that you as her husband can pull off this paradigm shift without facing a divorce. Also, whether or not you allow her to have additional sexual partners is technically up to you. It is your choice, not hers. It is technically your choice. Now, she can divorce you, and under divorcing you, she is choosing to be an adulteress. And this is why it is written in the Bible, and Jesus said, it's not good, or a man should not divorce a woman because he's literally turning her into an adulteress, which is technically true. This is why I do not teach men, I no longer teach men to divorce women, except for certain circumstances. But if she's not committing adultery, then don't divorce her. Just keep her and make it her choice to divorce you. Make it her choice to become an adulteress on her own. Make it her choice. That way you don't have any sin and she is the one choosing to be a hoe, not you. Okay? And it's so funny because the feminine primary social order just allows women to have this thing judging men. Well, you going around screwing a bunch of other women. Why can't I screw a bunch of other women? Because genders are not equal. That's why. Because women's value is based on how many sex partners they have. Okay? That's why the highest value woman is the sexy virgin, the sexy feminine virgin, right? That's how it works. The sexes are not equal. And according to biblical teaching, women were made for men, not the other way around. Okay? So get over yourselves. I don't give a damn about your feministic idealism, which can only exist in a culture of affluence. And guess what, ladies? Affluence is leaving this culture rapidly. Then what are you going to do? Because your feminist ideals, as a result of affluence, and affluence in a culture is a precondition, a prerequisite for your feminism to exist. And once affluence goes, you're going to be running to men for help anyway. It's so funny. Someone I talked to recently told me, without cultural affluence, without affluence in culture, women definitely know their place. But without affluence, they don't. Interesting how that works. So it's kind of like, the more hardship that we face, martial hardship that we face on a day-to-day basis, especially with our battle of the elements, definitely means feminism doesn't exist, because the women ultimately have to, as it is written in the book of Genesis, they don't really have a choice but to, your desire is for your husband and he will rule over you. Okay, that is one of the two curses given to Eve in the Garden of Eden as a result of her hypergamy, because she had sex and cucked Adam. Okay, that's a fact. All right, so that's a problem. So moving on. The point is that so if your wife's SMV is low and it is declining every day, it's very likely that you as your husband can pull off this paradigm shift without facing divorce. Also, whether or not you allow her to have additional sexual partners is all completely up to you. However, if she divorces you, make sure it is her choice. I agree with the Bible that it is wrong for a man to divorce a woman unless she committed adultery. Otherwise, you shouldn't divorce your wife in any circumstance. And another way of looking at it is don't chase a woman, replace her. So if your wife is behaving poorly and you would have grounds to divorce her, but she didn't commit adultery, all you have to do is tell her, hey, I'm letting my yes be yes and my no be no, and I'm going to go have sex with other women over there. I'm actually in talks with an INTJ, who's like, hey, I don't really want to have sex with my husband anymore. But that means it's incumbent on me to buy him the hooker, or potentially introduce him to other women so that those women can have, sex with my husband instead. So it's no longer my responsibility. I found that very fascinating. You see what I'm saying? Like this is a thing. This cultural shift is coming, folks, and you have to get ready for it. So as a result of all of this is the crux of the entire episode or lecture that we're doing here. And so I actually took the time to help provide a guide of sexual freedom, because you realize, as a result, you have a lot more sexual freedom, especially even under the Bible, than you realize. But here are the 10 commandments of sexuality. The 10 commandments of sexuality. Commandment 1, do not engage in sexual idolatry. Do not commit idolatry. It's very similar to thou shalt not have any gods before me. See, God expects man in general, or humanity, thou shalt not have any gods before me. It's no different than a husband telling a wife, you shall not have any other sexual partners apart from me. And that even includes in a polygamist situation. Okay? That's a fact. This is why that's the first commandment. No sexual idolatry. The second commandment, let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is basically Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. Also means do not engage in marriage vows. Okay, that's also the same commandment. No marriage vows. Marriage vows are idolatry, technically fall under rule number 2 or rule 1 or commandment 1. Okay, so don't do that. Commandment 3, which is for men. No sex with a virgin unless you intend to keep her. Commandment 4, which is for men. No sex or lust with a woman that belongs to another man without his permission. Now, if he gives you permission, have at it. The next commandment, for men. No divorcing a woman. Never chase a woman, only replace her. You can only divorce her, though, if she commits adultery. Basically, if she cucks you. Yes, but don't divorce a woman. The next commandment. So remember, don't chase a woman, don't divorce a woman, replace her, or take on an additional woman. Okay, have mistresses, have concubines. It's okay. It's biblically allowed. And Benjamin Franklin recommends that you have, when you have mistresses, potentially have older women because they very much appreciate it. The next commandment, so we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've done the first 5 commandments. Let's look at the 6th commandment. For women, no sex with a man who is not your husband without your husband's permission. Okay? Pretty basic. The 7th commandment, no sex during menstruation. People balk at this, but I believe it's for health reasons, especially since when a woman is menstruating, it's like 100% chance that a man's going to contract a sexually transmitted disease. So, if there is one present. So yeah, no sex during menstruation. The next commandment, this is number 8, no incest. I think that's pretty obvious. Number 9, no pedophilia. Also obvious. And number 10, no ritual prostitution at all. And while prostitution in general is very unwise, it is technically allowed, but no mixing spirituality or belief systems with prostitution whatsoever. This is what Paul was preaching against in the book of Corinthians. So, in conclusion, society is moving in a more poly direction. Whether or not you accept this or not, I don't care. Beta men will be relegated to being to supporting the feminized system of open cuckoldry, and everyone will basically be polyamorous. Alphas will expect polygamy, which means the women that they're with can only be with him and no other men. And as such, if he has those women, he can cut off any of those women who basically cuck him in that situation because he is the high-value man, and he gets to determine the terms for his life. That's just the reality of the situation. So that's what's coming. So the 10 commandments of sexuality here are basically to be not just guidelines, but actual rules or a moral code by which you as a man can live by within society. So you understand exactly what the problems are, where the sexual sin actually is, and as a result of that, you really know that you actually have a lot more sexual freedom than you realize. It's just a lot of men out there are completely oblivious to this fact, but it is a fact. Basically now, a man who is married to a 39-year-old disrespectful feminist woman all of a sudden has options that he never had before. And he could leverage those options against his wife anytime. All because, for example, when a woman gets married to a man, the fact is that men don't get very much out of marriage. In fact, they get very little, if not, they actually get nothing. Because when a woman gets married to a man, she no longer has to sexually perform because she's cashed out of the sexual marketplace. She doesn't have to compete with any other women anymore. When before marriage, she does have to compete with other women because you as a man could be sleeping with someone else. That's where the hot spider monkey sex comes from. But quality of sex goes down, frequency of sex goes down as well. They go down when you get married. And then also your woman lets her body go and she gets ugly. But if you as a man, especially if you're a high-value man who has multiple women that you have sexual relationships with, all those women, and they are aware that you're having multiple sexual relationships with other women, and they're aware of it, guess what? Guess what? They will compete with each other for your attention, which means hot spider monkey sex is always on the table. They will never let their body go. Ever one time. They'll be very respectful. They'll feel grateful. They won't allow their innate solipsism to get in the way because they have the solipsisms of other women to deal with. And then they keep it in the feminine female space where solipsism belongs. It never actually heads into your male space. You see what I'm saying? And because of that, they are a lot more humble. Okay? And what man doesn't like a humble feminine woman? right? That's how you humble women. Never chase a woman, you only replace her. Or in the case of the high-value man who has multiple sexual relationships with women committed to him, but him not necessarily committed to them, to just them, basically, in that regard. He is committed to them, as in he'll always be there for them and provide provisioning, protection, and parental investment, of course, and love them ultimately. Because marriage, that people think love is a prerequisite for marriage now. No, marriage used to be a prerequisite for love, actually, in the old days. You might want to consider that, right? Love actually grew as a result of being married ahead of time in the old days, so you might want to consider that. So, ultimately, you, as a man, have a lot more sexual freedom, even under the Bible, than you realize. Follow these commandments, and as a man, at last you'll have something worth living for. You'll have something worth fighting for. And ultimately, something worth dying for. Doing so will bring back masculinity from the dead, and will be an everlasting challenge to society and its elite, indefinitely. Because there's nothing more dangerous to society and its elite, the ruling class, than a man who has nothing to lose, or a man who has everything to lose. Imagine what would happen if this, and if all men in culture were behaving like this simultaneously. Society would be subservient to men, as it should be, instead of women subservient to society and men subservient to women, which is what Adam did in the Garden of Eden, after all. If you want to save the world, if you want to prevent fatherlessness, if you want to bring masculinity back into the world, if you want to challenge this corrupt, decadent society and its elite, then I highly recommend, men, that you all make the decision right now to live your life by the 10 commandments of sexuality immediately. As a result, guess what? Society will change for the better, we will have a better tomorrow, and our children will have a fatherful future, where they will be able to engage in masculinity and femininity, and ultimately the happiness of the human race will ultimately be restored. That's pretty nice. Fatherless, annihilated. This is how you do it. This is how you as a man participate. Follow and live your life by the 10 commandments of sexuality, and I guarantee you happiness. You will find it. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll see you guys tonight.